So you found out now, find out how, what was wrong and what is right now.
Welcome to Found Out, our social justice podcast brought to you by The Meritocracy, in which we cover all sorts of topics. Our last episode was all about prisons, and we ask, why should you care about them? And today's episode is something that both of us here know very intimately because we spent the first 10 years of our professional lives working in that arena, which is all about government. And we're going to be sharing some juicy scoops on inside life in government, which we haven't shared publicly before. We're going to be talking about taking on the Telegraph and what that was like. And we're going to be talking about the challenges facing government in an ever polarizing world. And certainly that feels very, very relevant today. Ultimately, the question is, what is the point of government?
Hello, everybody. Really nice to be back. As we often do, we're going to start with some factoids about government. So, would you like to guess how many people work in the civil service, listeners, watchers? Give you a second. It is 515,000 people, which probably shocks quite a lot of you. That is a huge amount of people. And that figure rises to 6 million people in the wider public sector. So that's including health, education, police, fire services, etc. And the civil service, so government, is the second biggest employer in the UK, behind, again, a pause, the NHS. And the NHS has 1.5 million people. Another fact for you, there are 24 ministerial departments in UK government. That means that they have a Secretary of State or a minister at the top of that department, as well as 20 non-ministerial departments like HMRC and the Food Standards Agency. It's a huge network of institutions that all kind of run like a separate business, even though they're obviously all government, all civil service, well, vaguely that, then yeah, they run kind of like individual businesses. So why should you care about government, Laura?
First of all, I'm just really impressed that you took on the facts. We need a little round of applause for Lewis, because this is...
Thank you, everyone. Not my forte, but I can read just about, so they were written down.
This is the first time you've ever done the facts, so it's a big moment.
Big step up.
Not your usual domain.
I'm learning.
Why should you care about government, and what's the point in government ultimately? Really good question. So every single service, when you're sick, when and where your child goes to school, when you report a crime, if you call any of the emergency services, all of those are decided by government ultimately. And with that, good government becomes one of the most important tools in social justice. It affects the benefits that are given out, who receives them, the services that are offered, again, who receives them, what legislation passes through Parliament, and ultimately what we choose to prioritise as a country and how we play on the global stage at the same time. So it's an incredibly powerful tool. And for many people, and certainly when we've spoken about working in government and having a career in government, it's something that feels very, very far away from their lives, which ultimately is a shame because it's not abstract. It changes and affects everything that you do every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just might be interesting for us to cover off our kind of journey into government, which we won't spend too long doing. When I first joined the government, when I would say, down the pub or with friends, that, I'm working for the government, everyone was always interested. They're like, oh, are you a spy? Which I never actually said I wasn't quite often when that was asked to me. So I just...
good pub chat.
Yeah, good. Like, well, look, I can't say, I've signed the Official Secrecy... What's it? Official Secrets Act.
Yeah.
Secrecy is not a word. And so I didn't really ever, bat that down. And people don't really understand, or I certainly didn't, that when you say that, like, how do you even do that? Like, and I didn't actually know that working in government was a career option until doing our masters, really, where I was like, finally, like, I was 25 and was doing criminology, and I was like, what can I do with this? And it all sort of started to click. And I think we said this on episode 1 briefly, that I was really interested in who and how, who decides and how it's decided how we live our lives as a society, how do laws get passed, who decides that around which tables, what is that dynamic, what sort of characters are in that space. And that always fascinated me. So, like I said, came in, we all both started after our master's year. I went through a direct appointment scheme. Laura went through the fast stream, which is like the sort of premium graduate program, really, isn't it? That's pretty hard to get onto.
And on that, actually, it's been interesting since we released our first 2 episodes. We've had some really amazing people still working in government or previously worked in government who've come forward, having been part of that Fast Stream community. So it does create a really nice community. So
yeah, it does.
please do reach out to us.
Yeah, completely. And we've got obviously loads and loads of friends that still work in government, haven't we? Obviously, we've got colleagues and potential, work partners that are all over the departments. So, yeah, I think that, just very quickly, sort of the bits that we were most proud of, I guess. So I started in the Department of Health, which was really interesting. But really we wanted to be in the Ministry of Justice. And I ended up, one of the last roles I did was the engagement lead for the Ukraine war crimes investigation, which I was really proud of. That was engaging sort of deputy heads of state to come together to decide how they were going to try the war crimes that were happening in Ukraine, that there was evidence of. I didn't ever look at any war crimes. That was very specialist teams, as you can imagine, and actually led out of the Foreign Office, I believe. But because of Raab being Secretary of State, and we'll talk a lot more about him, Dominic Raab, that is, in this episode, and his sort of Deputy Prime Minister role, it kind of fell in Ministry of Justice weirdly. It wouldn't normally have been us really convening those meetings. It would have been the Foreign Office. But what are you most proud of in your sort of government journey?
In my government journey, again, I've worked in 5 different government departments. So interestingly, they all have their own personality, their own culture, and of course, that's in some part dictated by the areas of policy that they focus on. So the Home Office working on border security feels very, very different to the Ministry of Justice working on prison policy, or the Ministry of Defence ultimately working on national security. And then again, that's extremely different to, of course, all of the other departments as well. And so I've been really lucky to have a real insight into how quite a few departments in and around government work and operate. And I would say that I'm certainly most proud of my work in the Ministry of Justice. It was Jack's death that motivated me to move out of the Ministry of Defence and into justice, which I'm sure you remember, to really follow my passion. It was something I'd always wanted to work on since master's year and since learning together. And it kind of felt like now or never, we aren't guaranteed tomorrow. So you've got to chase your dreams and the things you really care about today. And I did quite a few roles there, but namely working in the prison area and also working in reducing rape and serious sexual offences and working in violence against women and girls. And back then, this was just about pre-COVID or around early COVID, there wasn't at the time a standalone team dedicated to that issue in the Ministry of Justice, despite it being a huge area. And in fact, 20% of all crime is violence against women and girls. So given the Ministry of Justice is focused on responding to and ultimately preventing crime, it's quite a crazy statistic that there wasn't a standalone team, until less than 5 years ago. So I think that's something to really sink in. And I joined the embryonic version of that team, built it up and delivered work with amazing teams that I'm still incredibly proud of today in improving the criminal justice system's response to rape and serious sexual offences. And I would never for a second say that the issue is solved and that it's anywhere near good enough. It absolutely isn't. But that work to really bring that to the top of the agenda and to bring in new legislation, new programs, new practice on the front line felt really pioneering and still feels pioneering today. So I'm super proud of that and for being part of such a groundbreaking and fantastic team, many of whom I'm very close to still today.
Yeah, that was really fantastic work. I mean, it was sort of held up even, across government in number 10 as this is what policy should be. This is, how to change, really important areas for huge amounts of people practically. And that's where I think, policy sometimes loses its way a little bit in terms of who is this impacting? How do we actually deliver it and implement it rather than just really bold and grand ideas? And I think that was such a brilliant example of that.
We often talk about the importance of government not just designing but doing. And sometimes that doing is the hardest phase. So really moving from theory and ideas into how do we change people's lives in reality. And government has greater power to do that than anyone. But there is so much challenge in the system, and we're going to speak through some of that in a moment, that it becomes often much harder to do than to design.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And it was always something that I was really focusing on, not wanted to labour the point too much, but I worked in a lot of teams called implementation units, and most departments had one, or at least the ones I was in. It seemed like, I don't know how common they are actually across most departments, but I think they are. And that implementation unit was exactly that. It was kind of the frontline bit of policy, go out and, interview social workers or victims of, run, small groups to hear those voices. And those implementation units for me seemed like the pointiest end of policy making, which has always been both of our focus. And obviously where the meritocracy is really sitting is that right at that forefront of doing, acting, not just advising, as we often say.
Delivery, not advice.
Yes. I think then just the last thing to say on that, just to give you the sort of update of like the world, the main chunk of our time in government was a really kind of insane period. So we both started in government in the last throes of Brexit. Remember that? That was a rip-roaring success, wasn't it? It still is. Shortly after that, COVID-19 hit. And obviously, again, I won't go into how much that shook up the world, but that was obviously a huge amount of our time in government was working through that. And we were both on round-the-clock teams when that first broke, and I was in the Department of Health at the time. And actually, just something to reflect on here. I haven't got this in front of me, but I remember I was working on that, and that was shortly after Jack was killed, and the COVID pandemic had sort of swept through London, the sort of certain boroughs, and the mortuary capacity was full in London, which never really made the news. And I was on that specific team that was working with mortuaries to get refrigerated units into those spaces to deal with the corpses. And I actually had to be taken off that team because it was too close to death, essentially, whilst in the very the sharp point of grief. I was just got back to government really, and was just sort of
and it was just a few months after, wasn't it? A matter of weeks.
It wasn't
really
long. Yeah, and I sort of had to just take the director to one side and said, look, I've just gone through this and this is just too close, and I got moved off that team.
Yeah, and I think that's a really incredible, if difficult, example of the decisions and actions that government takes that changes your life and has a really material impact on what you do and what people do day to day and what communities feel and experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And to sort of set the scene to all of this and bringing it back to a kind of political sphere, this was all sort of happening under the Boris Johnson government, which came into power in July 2019, as we sort of work through chronologically. Remember that guy? Hard to forget. So yeah, I wanted to give you like a political recap of the time we were there.
Yeah,
And
I'm not sure if this is going to be fun or kind of terrifying. When we were looking at this, I was like, oh God.
We had Partygate. We don't need to go too much more into that. A big old garden party at number 10 when individuals could not even visit their dying relatives.
Wasn't it a Christmas party or was it multiple parties?
I can't remember. Maybe it was a Christmas party. But either way, it was like 60 people, wasn't it, all together? We had Liz Truss.
Karaoke, I think.
Karaoke, lots of wine. I think the wine order came out, the wine order, because they sent a junior member of staff from number 10 to pick up wine from the local shop. And that was a receipt that came out. That was one of the damning evidence points. We had Liz Truss, who was Prime Minister for 49 days. Classically and hilariously, a lettuce lasted longer than her. She almost single-handedly blew up the economy with £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts, of which the Bank of England had to intervene.
A very resilient lettuce.
A very resilient lettuce and a very unresilient Prime Minister. We had Matt Hancock, remember him, snogging in his office, breaking his own rules and then quitting. I actually covered in Matt Hancock's private office a couple of times when I was in the Department of Health and Social Care, and it was an interesting experience. I'll leave that one there. We had Chris Pincher, a very unfortunate name considering what he did. He groped 2 men in a private members club just to add to yet more scandal. And then I think
on that one, that's so horrendous because we so often, coming back to gender-based violence, we so often devalue the experiences of men and boys in that sphere. And the initial backlash from that very much did that as well. And thankfully, action was taken, but it's such a stark reminder of the kind of entitlement of thinking that you can do whatever you want and there won't be repercussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, that men and boys point is really, really critical there, that to focus on that and, treat that as severe as any other gender to gender in that space. And then the last one, Dominic Cummings, remember him, drove 260 miles during lockdown to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight. So yeah, I mean, all of those, and there was about another 20. It was just the most scandalous time to be working inside government when all of this was happening from our leaders, essentially, that we ultimately answer to in the civil service, even though it's an apolitical institution, and we'll talk a bit more about that. It was mad, really.
And before you move on, do you think we've become desensitized to those kind of scandals?
I do. I think especially with Trump and just the kind of insanity that's coming out of America, and where you can just seem to get away with anything, and it's just this cabal of billionaires that just have just thrown away all of the historical institutions that kind of bind us together and are just acting solo, really, or a group of maybe 5-10 people. Yeah, I think it's desensitized us massively, and I think we should be more sensitive actually to this stuff and more vocal.
Yeah, and I think the Epstein files is quite a stark reminder of that, of the number of people that needed to surround that to keep the wheels spinning, essentially, on that machine.
Mm-hmm.
The people who needed to turn a blind eye, and actually holding those in power to account for these scandals by doing what we can in terms of what we use, what we buy, how we vote, is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. And to add our voice to it, right, and to keep talking. And I guess that's what we're doing right now. And obviously, you know, again, we won't go too much on the Epstein files, but we're just scratching the surface on that. And all of that will come out in 5-10 years' time, probably, when all of these men are dead, because they're very elderly, a lot of them, and the truth will finally come out. But it's, completely shocking. So a couple of big sort of policy mistakes in our area at this time. The prison system was at capacity. It actually reached capacity, I think, a couple of times. And there was, use of army bases and various... The police custody was being used. Yeah, so that, and then also the Rwanda asylum plan that cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds and just didn't ever get going through legal challenge, rightly so. So alongside this, the kind of material difference for us as civil servants working in government was that kind of ministerial change, and especially change of Secretary of State's, the kind of top cheese in those departments. Do you want to talk through a little bit more about that? Because you were quite close with a lot of that, weren't you?
Yeah, so a lot of the roles I did were what are called private office roles, and they essentially, you're in the kind of close circle supporting the integration between the civil service and ministers, who are the political representatives, doing close quarter briefings and sort of processing the business of the department and making sure decisions happen, and that, the senior civil servants have the right kind of opportunity to engage with the senior political figures leading the department. So definitely saw the impact of that churn firsthand. In fact, in one private office role I did in a junior ministerial team, we had 4 ministers within a year. And the level of disruption that causes is immense. It's something I've spoken about in previous interviews and writing.
Do you want to just explain to the listeners/watchers what the difference between sort of junior minister teams are compared to the Secretary of State, just briefly? It's quite interesting.
Yeah, so the Secretary of State, ultimately, it's really a hierarchy. So the Secretary of State is the top of the department, and the junior ministers are their kind of deputy team, and they have varying levels of seniority, and they have a less broad brief and take a deeper look at key issues, ultimately.
That was a great explanation.
So, thanks.
You're welcome.
That was such a nice compliment.
Well, I'll throw them in. We're allowed.
Yeah, I love that.
It's our pod. Do what we want.
Yeah. I'm like, are you flirting with me on our pod?
No, I'm not. Maybe.
Okay. So, and in terms of the churn, I think what's really critical is that every time a minister changes, the resources and the focus shifts. And ministerial change, ultimately, appointment of top people in politics, there is inevitable change. So you will never eradicate all change. But what it causes is a really dramatic resource and focus shift. And just to recap a little bit of the change that we've seen over the last few years, which I think is higher than perhaps it's ever been in terms of the length of time people spend in their ministerial posts. So July to October 2022, that's, in 1 year, really, just over a quarter, 4 Secretary of States in the Department for Education. Between 21 and 22 in the Ministry of Justice, and we both experienced this firsthand, there were 4 different Secretaries of State: Dominic Raab, Brandon Lewis, Kit Malthouse, and then back to Dominic Raab again, which we are going to be chatting about in a moment. And perhaps most strikingly, and I think something that definitely international friends were commenting to me about from all over the world, is that we had 3 prime ministers within 7 weeks over the autumn of 22.
Crazy time.
Johnson, Truss, and Sunak. all within that period, which is really, really stark.
And so rare. It must be the first time that's ever happened. I haven't looked at the history of our country, but
yeah, I think maybe, well, I don't know.
Maybe there was a wartime one that happened.
Or maybe, yeah, we need to look that up. Any history buffs, please.
Yeah, please comment.
Please comment and let us know, because we haven't done enough research to know whether that's happened before, but we'd love you to do that for us. And we can't even blame the letters for that, but that's a particularly stark period. And what happens every time a minister changes is that they have to be brought up to speed with their portfolio. Sometimes it's something that they know nothing about. So you might have...
Quite often, in fact.
Often, yeah. So you might have ministers, say, walking into prison policy who've never been to a prison and or have no background in that area. Or you might have a minister walking into the Ministry of Defence who, again, has no background in that arena at all. So they've got to be brought up to speed on the key issues. They've got to decide on what their priorities are. And they've got to be briefed in across what is a huge portfolio, even for a junior minister. So again, for example, in the Ministry of Justice, the Violence Against Women and Girls and Victims Minister would need to get up to speed with all violence against women and girls harms, all kind of victims of serious crime harms, all legislation and everything in that arena in just a matter of weeks, which requires a whole series of briefings. It's a huge amount of resource and effort. And in my experience, it really takes probably 3 to 4 months before somebody can be kind of fully up to speed and sort of effectively running in terms of taking decisions, which is a huge lag of time. And if you obviously go through multiple changes like that in a year, it's really then difficult to take any action within that year. And I think this churn is something we should be thinking about more than ever when the pace of global politics is moving so quickly and the pace of technology is moving so quickly. So the opportunities are, and the change cycles, for want of a better word, are changing so rapidly that we need that stability in order for people to be able to grasp the latest change and direction very quickly and respond to it. Otherwise, we'll always be in the upskilling and the learning phase rather than in the action phase, which is really, really difficult, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, at the really sharp end of that you can be working in a policy team or in any area of the department, and just through a kind of change in the political winds, someone else comes in as Secretary of State and they just don't want to do what you've been working on. They take a completely different direction to the same problem. And therefore your work, which could be a month, a year, 2 years of work to get to a crescendo point, maybe a bill change or a law change, and it's thrown out. You just stop and you do something different. And that happened in light ways with my experience and happens quite often. And it's part and parcel of being a civil servant working in government. But I couldn't hack that. And that was one of the main drivers of leaving, really.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I guess the probably right next question is, what would we do about that? Because part of the change of politics is inevitable. But I do think prioritizing that prior knowledge as far as possible for people coming into roles. That expert area. And, really making sure that people are able to, where possible, be protected from that rapid movement so they can take kind of action on their brief. And maybe, thinking a bit more radically, is there a way we can use technology and direct resources to really bring people up to speed in order to be able to act and change very quickly in a way that is at the moment just really challenging because it's very resource heavy.
Yeah. And I guess on that resource and the kind of broader sense, I'd love to ask you, what are your perceptions of government and the civil service? What are the perceptions, and are they fair? What are the kind of broad perceptions that people say about government and the civil service?
Yeah, so this is a fun one. And this is definitely something that I've spoken about before and actually got trolled about online.
Yeah. Quite heavily trolled, quite hilariously trolled as well, actually.
Yeah, both hilariously and heavily. If you could be hilariously trolled. I mean, it didn't feel that great for the first 24 hours, but then I found it quite amusing. So one of the big perceptions of the civil service in particular is that it's bureaucratic and that it's slow. And the right-wing media in general have a favourite term that they use. I don't know who coined it first. I think it's really a Rees-Moggism. I'm not sure.
Well, it could be. I think it's been going longer than that, but it could be.
Yeah, or certainly he popularised it in recent times.
And also, by the way, a Rees-Moggism, I hope I never hear that again in my life, but I understand for framing the point.
Yeah, I won't say that again.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That kind of made me feel a bit sad and sick at the same time.
Yeah, same actually. But the perception is that civil service is the blob.
Yeah, which is the blob.
The blob.
I mean, come on. You've got to be a bit better than that, I think.
Yeah, which is the point that I made when I was interviewed for The Telegraph, and I got asked about the blob. And my point was it's very hard to take anyone seriously who, in an unironic way, uses the term the blob. And I really stand by that.
Yeah.
That's really ridiculous.
You can't call hundreds of thousands of people the blob. You need to be a bit more specific with the critique, I think, is the main problem with that.
Yeah. And I think there's also a perception of government and the civil service that it is very left-leaning and therefore very resistant to change implemented by a government that might consider it self-centrist or right of centre. And what I think has been quite interesting with this government is that there's still been that real back and forth between the political side and the civil service in feeling like action hasn't been quick enough, which we perhaps would have expected to dissipate a bit because of that perception of it being a very very left-leaning entity, the fixed civil service.
These are the sort of people that also sort of call them like the tofu-eating wokerati, which I just absolutely love as an insult. It's just off the tongue, brilliant and hilarious, and doesn't really mean anything. But I know what they're trying to say with that. And going back to that kind of left-leaning bit, you know, it is, I guess if you're sort of talking about your political leaning and sort of the roles you tend to go for in life, it kind of makes sense because nobody goes into government expecting to earn millions. You don't. It's actually really poorly paid up until the sort of mid junior ranks. And so it's not a money-making career. It's a mission-focused career.
Yeah,
and that,
for a lot of people on the front line, police officers, teachers, it's a real vocation as well.
A real vocation. And that is often people that have sort of left-leaning politics. And not always, but vast majority. And I remember they did a poll that actually something like 70, I think it's about 70% of civil servants in Westminster, which is not all of the civil service government, are left-leaning, vote Labour or vote left of centre parties. And of course it is an apolitical institution, which we will talk about, the civil service. It has to be. When you have those politics and you bring them to your job, it's very hard to separate completely. And I don't think we can expect that of people, and nor should we, you know, that kind of space.
Yeah, well, it's very hard as a human to come without baggage. And I think we've seen that when in the work that we've done, both in government and now as the meritocracy, that you always bring your whole human self to every problem that you manage. And perhaps that's one for another podcast. Yeah.
And, you know, I know for example, I had friends that wouldn't work on certain policy areas, and certainly I did as well. Had some red lines there. I think a lot of them were the kind of asylum policy that people didn't agree with, and wouldn't work in those policy roles, and they were kind of harder to fill. So it has unique challenges when those politics meets the civil service in a weird way, even though people often think they're the same thing. They're not really. And yeah, I just wanted to go back to the Telegraph piece actually, and how important it is for us to sort of break out of our echo chamber. And what that did and it was intentional, right? I don't know if you want to just talk about that, because I think this is kind of at the crux of where we're at politically, how we talk to each other, how society is functioning. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was interviewed by The Telegraph about 6 months ago by a brilliant journalist and individual who I really respect, Peter Stanford. And that interview was all about the meritocracy, our story, Jack's story, and ultimately why we set out on the journey that we have in founding this business and trying to change systems for the better to deliver social justice. I really knew that going into the Telegraph lion's den, I suppose, was going to be an arena in which people, a lot of the readers, weren't going to agree with what I had to say. But I think that's absolutely critical, because we can't just speak to those who agree with us. Otherwise, we never learn, and we perhaps never change minds. And it felt like a really, really important thing to do at the start of the meritocracy journey, to go outside of the echo chamber and really open up that conversation. And I really stand by that, because we live in a world that's increasingly polarized, fueled by social media and global politics of today, which means that it's more important than ever to be having conversations, I guess, across that ideological divide. And that felt really important, which is why I did it. And exactly as I'd expected, of course, I had no control about how that interview was portrayed, how it was framed, how it was,
even
published, how it was titled.
Yeah.
And actually, but I knew that would be the case, and it still felt worth it. And at the time that it came out, I think it was a Friday evening, and we sort of sat down and we took a deep breath and thought, wow, how are we going to respond to this? It doesn't align with how I would have presented myself necessarily, but it still feels critically important. And it really was, because I issued a rebuttal, which reached quite a lot of people and was a really interesting experience. And I also went into the comment section myself and engaged with the people kind of trolling my opinion and the work that we do as the meritocracy.
And your dress, weirdly.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of comments about what I was wearing and what I looked like, which is unfortunately a very common experience for any woman that dares to
be public
or speak up or say anything that might be considered at all, not even controversial, just to say anything.
Just
and I think
an opinion, to be honest.
Yeah, and we're recording this on the day after International Women's Day, so it does feel really important actually to reflect on that. So yeah, thank you for that, because ultimately, how you look or what you're wearing has got nothing to do with any of it, really, does it? But unfortunately, that is the case. That also felt important to challenge as well, to challenge the stereotype of what does somebody look like who is engaging with government and aiming to pioneer and change direction. Okay, it's not the same faces and the same people always doing it, and that also felt important to me, and to be hopefully a role model to women and girls everywhere that this is for you as well. You should be getting involved with this. So that's a bit of a segue, but that also felt really important. And despite the trolling, despite the unwanted comments, despite that first few hours was quite challenging, because you're sort of seeing this flood of quite negative stuff come in, slowly but surely I actually had really, really interesting conversations with people who reached out to me. And there were people who said, oh, you made me think a bit differently. Or maybe if they didn't go as far as saying you changed my mind, although some people did, they said, you changed my mind. That even if that's 1, 2, 10 people, that made it really worth it. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I think gave me a real insight into how deep the perceptions of the civil service and government run, but also how important it is to keep challenging those and to keep stepping outside of our own echo chamber, particularly in Westminster and Whitehall, and kind of bring that conversation into different arenas and make it feel different and bring those messages. Yes.
Yeah, brilliantly said again. And it was a really powerful piece. And I think just it's a funny term, but one that is true, that you're definitely not pale, male and stale, which a lot of politics traditionally has been in that arena. And even Westminster, and you see the same sorts of faces, the kind of privately educated, middle to aging men, that it all just I think it flummoxed a lot of people. It kind of short-circuited a few things, and it was just like, well, how can you be this? And yeah, it was really powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying on that, reflecting on that, if I was Black or minority ethnic, that would have been an even harder experience for me. And I'm not at all saying for a second that there wasn't still a degree of privilege in how I could show up and how I could put my head above the parapet to do that. And that's also why it felt important, because actually for many people, that feels impossible. Yeah. And especially in where we are right now, where as a country we're feeling increasingly divided, that felt to me really critical to say, and still feels really critical to say, like, that is not the country that I want to live in and would ever tolerate. But we do have a position of privilege in being able to say that. But it means we've got to keep doing it and keep using that for good and for social justice.
Yeah, and using that platform and elevating those voices that don't traditionally get heard. And that is a real key thread to the business, isn't it? To get that lived experience and those voices on those platforms that they it's very hard to reach otherwise. So if we can be a conduit in that way, I think that'd be a job well done.
Definitely.
So I'm going to switch up that conversation a little bit, and this is something that.
Before you go into that, I just want to talk about how that perception meets reality.
Oh, of course.
And I won't say much on this, but truly the most passionate, caring, committed people that I've met, many of those are working in government, and people do deeply, deeply care about what they do. There's huge amounts of team and individual brilliance and support, and often with little thanks and those really challenging perceptions that we've spoken about kind of flying around wider society and the media, it's tough to stand up to that. And it's been a tough ride over the last few years for the civil service through massive transition and massive change for government. So just wanted to say that the reality, and that's partly why I've defended it so staunchly, just doesn't match up to that perception. And I really, really stand by that to anyone that would ask.
I want to absolutely second all of that. Genuinely, some of the most brilliant people I've ever met, some of the greatest minds I've ever had the privilege to work with in how they view problems and society, the world, empathetic, brilliant, beautiful people. So, and there is hundreds of them in each department. So going back to the point I was about to start there. So this is kind of like a crescendo moment for me and for both of us in different ways, but similar ways. And that was the Dominic Raab bullying claim that came out in 2022. So I've got a sort of semi-script, semi-not with this because I have to be pretty careful sort of legally, but I'm not going to go too close to the bone with any of this stuff. Just going to give some personal reflections. But what I would like to say first of all on this area is that on this topic is that this episode reflects my personal experience and opinions. The events discussed were the subject of an independent investigation whose findings are public.
You can go and look it up and make your own mind up.
Yeah, Casey Tolley report, Tolley, I believe. So I wrote a complaint about Dominic Raab with other colleagues in the Ministry of Justice. And that was in roughly the June of 2022 that we sent to the top of the department. I can't really touch too much on the kind of internal workings on that, but that was what occurred. And we didn't hear anything back from that, but we thought we had to make, our voices known. And then kind of crucially, well, not kind of crucially, in November 22, Raab said in Parliament, and I quote, "I have never tolerated bullying, nor that he was aware of any formal complaints made against him." And that was on a Thursday or Friday, maybe the Friday, I think. And then on the Monday, our director called us all in and was like, that was an official complaint, wasn't it? Back in, a few months ago. And I remember saying to him, if that wasn't an official complaint, I don't know how to officially complain. And he was like, I thought that was the case. So that was the starting pistol of this, really, in many ways. And that snowballed over time. And there were then multiple complaints, which were actually in the report, 24 in total, across 8 complaints over multiple years, 2 or 3 years of Dominic Raab in various departments. The report describes behaviour, and this is a quote, that undermined and humiliated, which had the effect of intimidating civil servants. So I'll say that again. Behaviour that undermined and humiliated, which had the effect of intimidating civil servants. Essentially, that was found to have breached the ministerial code related to bullying. However, the term bullying was never actually in the report. And it is my personal view that the language of the findings was cautious and arguably softer than the conduct described within it. Being part of that process and getting interviewed by a KC in the Cabinet Office under a chandelier and all of the kind of media that came with it was just a really crazy thing to be a part of, and was, I quit shortly after that. That wasn't the sole reason, but it was a big push out the door, really, in terms of the fatigue and how that sort of transpired. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the kind of leader that Raab was, and that kind of strong man approach. And I do say that on purpose, the sort of macho approach that he took to leading the department. Have you got any thoughts on that at all?
It's a really stark example of the power imbalance that exists in any leadership hierarchy. But when we're seeing world leaders behave in the way they are today, we should really heed that warning. And it's something that I will kind of never take for granted now, is understanding how rapidly a culture can shift and how differently people will act when they are in a space of fear.
And it's kind of like the fragility, really, of democracy that we're kind of seeing fraying at the edges of countries that we never thought we would. And again, I talk about the US there and other places in the world where those sort of fibers that have brought us together over hundreds of years are sort of fraying and shifting at the moment. And it was really interesting because it was a real kind of like microcosm, a kind of a mini version of how you could see like a dictatorship forming around the world, and the atmosphere that changed, and just how the department felt under his leadership was incredible. And it was one man, one person.
Yeah, and I think, that's why like having really high standards for behaviour in government is so critical, because we ignore that warning at our peril, right? Of how quickly individuals and their behaviour can shift organisations, culture and systems ultimately.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And that's where the civil service comes into its own. It's where government absolutely comes into its own. I kind of jokingly said that when I was working in government that I was the idiot buffer between the Tories and the public, and that's what the civil service was. That they could have 3 ideas, one of which was good, and we say do that one, and then it becomes the policy. And what I really mean by that in a more like holistic and less silly way is that, the civil service and government at large is that buffer between politics and the public. And it is apolitical as an institution. As much as I said it's kind of left-leaning, it does not act like that. It serves the government of the day, and it does it absolutely brilliantly, obviously with its huge flaws as well. But overall, it does it as well as it can a lot of the time in that setting. And that is why it's slow, bureaucratic and risk averse, because it should be. It's not, tech bros moving fast and breaking things and, flunking at 100 million investment here and there. Of course, that has happened in various ways. It is slow. It's careful. It's calculated. It's hierarchical. There is many eyes on everything that happens. And that is a safety measure, but it's also very slow. And of course, we've experienced both ends of that. We've come through that system of government, and now we're year one of a startup that every single day could go in 20 different directions, all of which really fun and exciting and creative, because it's our thing that we get to control entirely. So it's a really interesting sort of career that we've had to have both camps, and to really use the benefits of the civil service and to approach what we do with care and caution, but also to be flexible and creative and move quickly when we need to. And I think that's a really nice blend. What do you think on that?
Yeah. Well, how would you bring more creativity into government?
It's a really good question. And I think that, I think that's hopefully ideally what we're trying to do with the meritocracy, that we can speak both languages now, right? So it's working with, sort of outside providers. That doesn't have to be a big, massive consultancy that they often work with and spend, hundreds of millions. There's amazing creative businesses that can come in and advise and to really bridge that gap and to be hand in glove working with government and sort of loosen that framework a little bit, I think, and hear more voices. What would you do?
I think it would give people working in government more opportunity to test and experiment. So particularly to engage with the people who the decisions impact, to engage, as you said, with other organisations, whoever they may be, charities, businesses, all offering and doing fantastic work. And my biggest regret is that when you're in government and you have the Ministry of Justice or, number 10 on your email signature, everybody wants to take your call, and everybody will drop what they're doing and listen to you and come and speak to you and offer their opinion and offer their support, because a lot of people working around that are in the area where they're expert. They really care about it too. So they want to have that conversation with you. And I think where government hits boundaries is in thinking that all the answers have to come from internally, and that it's not okay to kind of go out and have that engagement and have those conversations. And I really, really would endorse that as a core practice of what goes on in government. And it's certainly my biggest regret that I didn't do even more of that.
Yeah, great summary. And I think a great place to start to wind up this episode, to be honest with you. I think we've covered a huge amount there.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about what happens when it goes wrong, when there's a power imbalance and you see that strongman leadership rising up. And we just had a great question come in from the side from our amazing production team, which is, what is the antidote to that strongman leadership style? What is the antidote to government that isn't working?
For me, that the overall, what I'd like to sort of call and has been called, it's not, I haven't coined this, but the sort of personality of politics has just gone so far to this realm of, American politics has always kind of been the kind of showbiz, this kind of $1 billion presidential campaigns. It's all kind of game showified. It's a very different scene. And I think we're kind of following suit here. And I certainly think the last Conservative government followed suit that, and to some degree, some elements of this Labour government, that you have to be this kind of insane or caricature version of yourself to get noticed, to lead and to run departments and the country, essentially. And I also really love another term that I've heard a lot of is, and it's coined off the "Make America Great Again" slogan, is to make politics boring again. And I semi-agree with that. I don't want to know what the Secretary of State for the Department for Education is doing in their private life. I don't want to know if they've had an affair publicly or groped someone in a members club. Just don't do that. Don't elect people that have those traits, that elect good people. There are amazing people that do not have this platform. And I guess it's kind of like a spreading out of channels into politics. And I think the Green Party are probably doing this quite well in terms of how they're using social media and getting voices in that space, and others as well. That it's just, we know what these people are about before we elect them. We knew what Boris Johnson was like before he became Prime Minister. We have a clue on this. We cannot be electing these people because they're a laugh down the pub, or that actually, they said that one thing that I kind of agree with. We have to be engaged. We have to be, really delve deep and use your autonomy use your agency. We all have the same amount of agency with different, pedestals and privilege, of course, but together we are really strong. And, that kind of, I guess, the kind of power to the people point, really, that I think if we keep platforming that, and hopefully we can do this through our platform and continue to grow that kind of landscape, then yeah, I think that's what I'd say on that.
And I think would say that's probably the first time I've heard you ask for more boring.
Yeah.
So that
I don't normally seek boring.
You don't normally seek boring, which is in 10 years of knowing you. So that shows you why. This is serious.
Yeah.
This is serious,
and I get the apathy point, right? I understand it's so hard to engage with this stuff because it's just over and over and over again, left and right of politics, being let down. And we have been let down. We have been let down majorly. And we deserve better as a nation.
Definitely. And yeah, what would I say to that? I think the question that I would answer is what is the antidote? And I do think it is in that community movement and engagement. As you said, we've all got agency to vote. And if you believe in something, please vote, because your vote really counts. And still, particularly amongst younger people, particularly amongst people from deprived communities, there is still a less of a voting turnout. So it's really critical, because what happens in government really, really matters to you and your life, as it does for everyone. So that is the first one. And the other one is, in terms of the people who are there as leaders, I think it's having the confidence. And I was having this conversation this weekend. It's having the confidence to lead with both action, but also care. And I think that's something that often feels hard in government, but is absolutely critical to bring right to the fore in terms of how we get things done, is to hold that care and compassion and, and togetherness. And I do also think that in terms of the most successful engagement techniques, government over the next period is going to have to get really, really good at playing that at its own game. So we've seen elections won and lost in recent years on social media, and government has to get really, really good at engaging with the public and with opinion through those channels, in reading what's going on, in responding in a way that is coherent and is in line with values and shows that they stand for something. And I think partly that has been lost, but that battle will get fought, and there will be actors, working into the UK as they are across all over the world, who want to influence the outcome of the government and of those decisions. And we've really got to stand fast to that point of ethical leadership. And I really think that ethical and moral leadership has never been more important. So I guess maybe the thing is that if you are that person, if you have that quality and you are a leader and you are stepping forward in government or in your sector, then you're more important than ever. And I do believe, I feel really hopeful and optimistic because I think in the work we do in the meritocracy, we see those people every day leading across, whether it be violence against women and girls, whether it be modern slavery, whether it be in prison reform, whether it be in the civil service, whether it's in private sector or in charity. And all of those leaders need to come together because they are more important than ever.
And I've got one more point, and I want to say this directly to TikTok, actually, because you're the age demographic that this is important for. And we had our first views on TikTok, which is lovely for someone that is not on TikTok very much, because I'm just not.
We're huge on TikTok, guys.
Yeah, we're massive on TikTok. We're going to be massive.
We've got, I think, less than 10 followers.
Yeah,
but we're going to be huge.
But we are going to be huge. But anyway, to 16 to 18-year-olds now, and maybe even slightly younger than that, slightly older, that sort of demographic, you do have the power to change. You have the power to change the world. And what happens at the moment is they've got kind of the kind of boomer generation, or kind of, that kind of, say, 40 to 80 are incredibly engaged in politics, and they turn out in droves to vote, and that is then the only group that is then represented, right? So we getting that voter turnout up amongst, obviously you have to be 18 to 25, we get that through the roof, then you have a world that represents you, and there are people out there. You can do that, and you should. So that would be my main call out, because I think if we get the youth of today to be turbo engaged in this stuff, and I think they are.
I think they already are. I think you already are, TikTok.
Back to you, TikTok. I think
which is amazing.
They are, and we're really feeling that, right? Like Gen Z and whatever, Gen Alpha after them, and they're really young at the minute, so they're not going to vote yet. Is that like you guys really get it, and to really vote for those people that feel intuitively right to you, because it isn't what we've had before it. And if we can be sort of guidance in that as slightly older millennials, but millennials and Gen Z, we're a team. We'll change the world, we'll change politics, and it will be very different when 18-year-olds today are 40.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting then to reflect on for older voters, whoever and wherever you are, and that this is your legacy also. Like, what kind of world do you want to leave as your legacy, rather than what kind of, protections do you want in the present? I think that's also very interesting.
And just to add a caveat there, I didn't want to be ageist with that and say that, all older people vote, right-leaning, blah, blah, blah. But we do see that, there is age, disparity in that voting pool. And so, I didn't want it to become like an age thing or a generational gap. I think we need to come together as generations, because we're all speaking the same language in certain threads. That's community, I'm not pushing the generations apart, because we've got enough division, as we've spoken about today through this episode, geopolitically and through lots of different stretching moments at the moment in society. We certainly don't need it across generations as well. I wanted to say that because it was an important point.
So I'm going to end on what's the point in government? And my one line is to change systems for the better, for you and people you care about, and to create a world in which you can be safe and thrive. And it's government's job to steward that.
And my one line is, I agree with everything Laura just said.
Too much facts.
Just all of that, like we've spoken about, it is so important. It is a crucial institution in our democracy. It is the thread that can make the most change. And just with some fine tuning and different voices, I think it can be something that it has never been before.
Exciting. We're very hopeful and very optimistic.
Great question, Rustic Studios. Cool. Right. So to wrap up, we do this every episode, all three of them.
Quick fire.
So, Laura, what have you been doing to keep you sane this week?
So I've just had the joy and pleasure of coming back this morning from North Wales, which is very beautiful. And I know we have some listeners in North Wales, which is cool.
Nice.
Because they've messaged me.
We're big in North Wales as well. Big on TikTok, big in North Wales.
Yeah, we're big.
We're smashing it.
And there's lots of people there, as everyone knows. We're big in North Wales. I've just had the joy of coming back from there, having spent the most fantastic weekend, actually across generations, to the theme of some of the last questions, on celebrating International Women's Day, and through the incredible network and power of connection of Sally Bibb, a dear friend of both of ours.
Total legend.
Complete legend. Thank you, Sally. A very inspiring and fulfilling and uplifting weekend with many women of many different life paths talking about the future and leaving feeling very hopeful. So that's been a great way to feel really inspired.
Lovely. Very nice.
And what about you?
Yeah, I've had a very busy weekend. Obviously, you were away, so my right-hand gal was gone. And so I was, on Saturday, it was a really important annual event, which was Jack Merritt's, our boys' memorial rugby match, which is put on by All Greys rugby team in the University of Cambridge. They're a kind of mix, a sort of hodgepodge of colleges all coming together to form a rugby team. And then yesterday had a real privilege, which we were both invited to, but as you said, you couldn't make it, to Fulham Football Club. I'm not a Fulham Football Club fan. I mean, I'm not a Fulham fan, sorry. I'm a Fulham Football Club fan with what I'm about to say. And they are doing absolutely unbelievable work in the sort of violence against women and girls space. And because it was International Women's Day yesterday, they were playing Southampton in the FA Cup, to whom they lost to a 90th minute penalty. And the Fulham players came out with jackets of, and on those jackets were names of women that were important in their lives that looked like a football kit. And then at halftime, Eleanor Rowland, who is absolutely phenomenal, is the director of kind of I can't remember her full title, but is in charge of this kind of work, came out and did a speech with some others about, how important that signal is to start to reframe how football clubs and the power of football can reach people that aren't engaged in this particular arena, meeting, particularly men and boys where they are with this, and to start to shift the dial. And I think football holds unprecedented power in that. And
I think, just to really double down there, because I think the work that Eleanor and the team are doing at Fulham is really, really pioneering and absolutely incredible.
Agree.
And really shows the power of sport to make change for social good. And we just think you're absolutely brilliant in what you're doing. And I think if every organisation was following suit, it would be a very, very different world. So
yeah, well, if every football club, you could start there. Say every Premier League football club was doing even half the work that Fulham are doing, it would be absolutely phenomenal change. Yeah, and I think that is coming.
Definitely a future episode, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Football. We'll get Eleanor on, maybe. You have to now. I've said it on the pod, Eleanor. Cool. So last questions, right?
Yeah, Lewis, we haven't heard from you. We heard from me, episode 1, Chris, episode 2, on what our work animal would be.
Yeah.
What's your work personality if it was an animal?
Yeah. And obviously I've had this question on my iPad, so I was thinking about it before coming on. And I am going to say lion, and that's going to get some eye rolls from everyone that knows me and people that don't. Like, oh, of course you are, like, big man thinking you're a lion.
Also, you're just not a lion.
I'm just not a lion. But the reason why I say that is that, like, I like to think that I'm king of the jungle and kind of have this like big mane and kind of just go out and kind of show off about the meritocracy because I'm really proud of it. In reality, much like lions, it is the lionesses that run the show and go out and hunt and bring home the food. And I just loved that sort of image because you're a real lioness. And I guess by proxy, that just, whatever makes me a lion. So that's
I think we'll let you have it. I'll
maybe come back with an actual accurate one in the coming weeks, coming episodes.
No, that's brilliant. So I think that is everything we've got time for today. A huge thank you to Exo Barbers, Exo Bikes, and
back in our spiritual home, you'll see.
We are back in our spiritual home here in South London. It was a difficult moment for us to go north of the river. And a big thank you as ever to Rustic Studios, our fantastic production team, who are just brilliant, to Dan Garwood and Ollie Drummond for our original pod intro and outro tune. We're very proud of it and I think they smashed it. So that just leaves me with, join us for next time for our next episode, which is a topic that everybody knows about and nobody wants to talk about. A riddle. It's pornography, and we're very much looking forward to that episode. So yeah, join us next time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So you found out now, find out how, what was wrong and what is right now. Sit back and listen to the Meritocracies podcast. So you found